This recording was produced by the Disaster Resilience Leadership Academy of Tulane University. Welcome to the Masters of Disasters Alumni Speaker Series. These webinar sessions offer students the opportunity to hear directly from DRLA alumni as they speak on their careers, tips for gaining employment post-graduation, and how competencies learned at the DRLA are applied in the field. The series will promote student-alumni mentoring and networking in a diverse array of prospective career paths. On January 27, 2017, students heard from DRLA Alumna Jen Hardin. Jen works as the Director of Enterprise Risk Management for International Relief and Development, responsible for supporting 17 tactical security teams within 9 countries in the Middle East, Africa, and South America. Her duties include conducting field site security risk assessments, developing and delivering training curricula to 1,800-plus field and HQ staff on enterprise risk and security management, and analyzing the likelihood and impact of organizational threats in order to advise senior leadership on mitigative actions. Due to operating in conflict and active combat zones, much of Ms. Hardin's focus is on safety and security planning for personnel and guard force staffing, including travel and transport, hardline perimeter and facility enhancement, compound access point systems, as well as contingency planning for crisis-level incidents. Ms. Hardin is an NAEMT, Tactical Casualty Combat Care Medic, IAEM Associate Emergency Manager, and Hostile Environment Anti-Terrorism, HEAT, Certified Security Professional. This webinar was introduced by Dr. Meredith Fike.
Around the table here, you have some DRLA students in the program, and we just wanted to thank you for taking your time and being the first alumni for the Masters of Disaster Alumni Speaker Series. We're excited to hear from you today. I've distributed your bio to the cohort, and so if you could just kick us off and tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and how you got there and how you're using the competencies learned in the DRLA program in the field.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. I guess I'll start with kind of my career path, and I'll bring it up to present. And there's a couple kind of topics I wanted to share with you that may be of importance now or in your professional career. So I took a kind of meandering path, and I think that's fine to do. I think it exposes you to different ideas. So I actually worked for the railroad, and then after that I owned and operated a brewery. And then I decided that I would want to volunteer with UN refugees, which is really disparate, but I'm really thankful that I took that chance and started volunteering because it opened my eyes to a whole world that I was really interested in. So after that experience, I decided that for me at that time, I thought, okay, I'm going to go to law school. I'll pursue that path. And so I did. I applied for law schools, and I then happened upon the DRLA program, which was really interesting. So I just decided that that's what I wanted to pursue. It was a great decision in retrospect. I met some of really great friends, but also some of the most talented and skilled people that I continue to call on if I need, help with a project, or maybe they have a particular, skill set or expertise that I lack. So I guess that's my point number 2. Point number 1 being it's okay if your path meanders, and that if you're interested in one thing, but that kind of opens up an avenue or a possibility for something else. But point number 2 is definitely, look around, and also the people online. This is your network. And so it's incredibly important to kind of respect that and to grow that. I can think of just numerous times that I've reached out to people like Christy and Sophie. Are they speaking to Christy or Sophie, Meredith?
Yeah, well, Christy has been in touch, and actually she's kicked off handing down, so to speak, the information on the Clinton Fellowship. And okay. So Tim Hefflinger, a recent graduate, is currently pursuing that fellowship, and I'm hopeful that he's in India. I'm not sure exactly what part, but
Okay.
He's doing his work there, and then after that, I'm hopeful that we'll keep getting DRLA students. But they're on my list. They're on my short list of potential alums for the next sessions.
Okay. So to give you an idea, Sophie and I, when we were students, we found this project that we were interested in. To give you a little background, she's an architect, brilliant architect, and I was really interested in the emergency management side, mass care, but also evacuation and also ingress, egress for facilities. And so we found this opportunity to work with the Naval Support Center. It's a facility that had been through a series of grants basically given to the city from the Navy. And to basically look at that kind of blank shell of a structure that's massive. It was 1.5 million square feet, and to see how it could be reworked and reused for the citizens of New Orleans and to help and support emergency efforts. So we redesigned that, and it was really fun and interesting to be able to work with a colleague so closely on that type of project. So point number 3 is that it's a great program. It is younger, so if there's something that you're not seeing that you're interested in, seek it out, get that opportunity. I made a habit of that, and I'm happy that I did now in my career, because it's a way to expose yourself to so many different types of skills, even within our field. It's pretty varied. So after the DRLA, my first job was at International Relief and Development. I was an intern for 7 days. Then I was handed, so 15 days after that, I was handed the entire Yemen portfolio. It was honestly, it was extremely daunting. I was overwhelmed kind of from day one. I thought I'd had a pretty good grasp, from the program in terms of tenets of humanitarian aid and principles, but there's a difference when you go to apply that in your day-to-day professional life. And so it was tough, but it was really a growing experience for me and a humbling experience, because I got to learn so much from people that I worked with, but more importantly, people in the field, local employees in the field, to be specific. So that portfolio consisted of 5 programs in Sana'a and Hodeidah. Hodeidah is a more rural community, a tribal community. We did everything from water borehole well rehabilitation to wash type of programming, so sanitation, things like that. And we worked with, you have to be creative in a lot of these programs. I think for that one, it was eye-opening to see some of the ideas that the local staff came up with that were really clever. Obviously, there's a gender identity kind of disparity in Yemen culturally. So to get some of the information to women and to children, we would do it through local theater, grassroots theater, because that's how we were allowed to actually have both sexes in the same place at the same time. So be okay with being creative, and it may sound wacky, but if it gets the job done, it could be a really good idea. So that's my tip number 4, I think. While I was managing the Yemen portfolio, I was asked to participate on the Syria task force. So this would have been 14 months into the civil war, and I was basically put on the team to make sure that I could equip and train local community members from Aleppo and the surrounding areas on how to relay community needs assessments. So everything from the price of firewood and how they were getting that firewood in terms of the market value chain. So were they purchasing it from the PKK? Did that create a series of kind of potential issues for these folks to get firewood for heating and cooking? Prices of local commodities, things like that, as well as damage assessment. So masjids that had been damaged, schools, hospitals, things like that. And so we would work from Ankara, Gaziantep, and then Kilis, and then that's on the border. It's about 25 miles northwest of Aleppo, and then meet folks, train them, and send them back home to make sure that we could get accurate data. So that was a really great experience, and that was kind of the first time that I saw that technology could play a huge role in humanitarian aid, but it's fallible and it's not perfect, true, but it was definitely helpful in the situation until the cell towers started coming down. So after that experience, I also was lucky enough to have on my team the now Chief Security Officer, and he was instrumental in kind of opening my eyes to this issue of safety and security of aid workers, but also what impact do our presence have on the local community. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that was the first time definitely during that field experience that I was definitely awakened to that concept. I decided to move back to New Orleans. After my time at IRD, I became operations manager for a local organization called evacuteer.org. I don't want to spend too much time on that because is Kaylee speaking too?
Yeah, she's going to be one of the ones upcoming.
Okay, great. So I don't want to take anything away from that. She was my director of operations, and now she's the executive director. So once again, you know, that's all because of that network. I saw in her, when I hired her, just an amazing amount of skills and competency. So I felt really comfortable handing off the reins to someone like Haley. So from operations manager, then moved to executive director after a year at the organization. That whole experience for me, I don't want to talk too much about what the organization does. I'll let her explain that. But for me, it really was insanely valuable to be able to grow from 12 partner organizations to 22 community organizations that partnered with us to carry out the city-assisted evacuation plan. So that meant I was able to meet people, talk to people, talk about their needs, from, you know, pregnant women in 7th Ward who are struggling to make ends meet, you know, to more affluent people in Uptown. And to be able to really look at the plan and say, are we providing and are we making sure that we have a support mechanism in place, and does it make sense? So that was wonderful. Also different types of organizations like Fuentes, which is really serves the Hispanic community, and then also the Vietnamese community as well, because culturally speaking, there are just different needs that they have, and also their communication structure is different than like a normal neighborhood association group, something like that. So that taught me a lot. And that was important, and I took that knowledge and definitely applied it to how we work with local communities in Pakistan, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, places like that. So we worked, you know, at EDI, I worked really closely with local Homeland Security, and so again, I kind of started thinking more about this kind of, how does it align? How does safety and security align with humanitarian aid? How does it align with domestic response? And from that, I decided to go ahead and transition back to international work. So I was recruited back as a security officer, back to DC, and so I took that position, and that's really where I started to become more immersed. Sorry about the disruption back there. To become more immersed in kind of these ideas of security strategies. What does it mean for us to be to use an acceptance strategy, in that the local community really accepts your presence there? What does it mean to have a deterrence strategy? You know, those are more of like the hard perimeter infrastructure type kind of, you know, fences, things like that. You know, cameras, to deterrence, and that would be more of an example of like the programs that we have in Afghanistan, where it's, you know, compounds, full-on close protection, armed guards, things like that. And then, you know, which one works best, and does that change over time? So now, after 2.5 years of the organization, I was security officer. I went from there to being the global security manager, and now I'm the director of enterprise risk management. So then there's a confluence that happens, and it started to happen, and so now we're present day. So these are kind of things that I wanted to share with you, to maybe just put them on your mind or on your radar, but also to kind of give you an idea of what almost all INGOs, to be honest, are really looking for in terms of a basic understanding. And a lot of them are prioritizing this, i.e. creating new positions for these types of topics. So there's this confluence that happens between security and safety issues and risk management. And for so long, it was really easy for us to explain the importance from security guys who had been doing security risk management in the field. And to give you an example of what this looks like, it's basically our field teams that decide, in Kabul. Like if we're going to make a movement that day, we'll identify threats that could happen, risks that could happen, and then we'll think of a mitigation or a treatment plan, and then we decide whether we're going to act on that. So it's more of a decision-making process. So security guards have been doing this for years, but it wasn't until about from this is my opinion, from about 2 years ago, when you could see international organizations like DAI and Chemonics, Save the Children, really start to think about risk management as it applies to other business processes. So as it applies to our program management. And I think it's become incredibly mainstay and incredibly important, both from the organization standpoint, but also from the donor standpoint. So the Australian government recently transitioned to ISO 31000, so it's an international standard set in Geneva for risk management, and their entire government structure is that. So they're a donor of ours, we're an implementer of theirs, so that means that we also need to follow that same type of structure. And I think you're going to find that in a lot of the organizations that you will, Mercy Corps is another one, IMC, International Medical Corps is another one, that are all looking towards embedding risk management, not only in security, but across the organization, so from finance all the way to program management. So I thought that might be something helpful, and we can talk more about it if you have specific questions on how that may apply. And then, you know, at the end of the day, it's like it's kind of how do organizations want to prioritize this, and how do you want to allocate resources to carry this out? You know, we make the argument, and we try to do it unbiased, just based on numbers, not based on feelings, that, you know, this has an impact to their program, and failing to do safety and security well and protect your staff, and as well as your local staff and our beneficiaries, can have a devastating impact on the program. So whether it's financially, whether it's reputationally, more importantly, the ability to work in that area again can be impacted by failing to do that. So as you kind of go out and pursue, by the way, I read all of your bios. You're incredibly diverse and really skilled and amazing people. I was wondering like what you're going to gain from me speaking to you, because you have incredible backgrounds, but you know, be that as it may, I think as you go out and you really pursue these different types of even within your different types of fields, these organizations at its core, the framework is really the same. So I think that if you prioritize and come with that mindset that safety and security is important, I think it's going to definitely help kind of frame your perspective. So what I do now, I cover Pakistan and East Asia, so I work and train our field security teams there. I'll go out on site assessments and do, you know, the traditional site risk assessment, and then look at a program risk assessment. From that assessment, that typically gives us where we have gaps and vulnerabilities. It also gives us our external or our non-state actor list. So, for example, in Pakistan we have MQM, the PPP, which are really political parties, but they have these kind of mafioso-esque kind of organizations that carry out more of the violent acts. You can mix that also with current and trending issues. So now ISIL-K is heavily recruiting, so it's Khorasan. They're actively recruiting within the area. So that's Islamic State of the Levant. And then we also have in the north, of course, we still have issues with the Pakistani Taliban, and then also Al-Qaeda kind of safe zones. So if you kind of mix all of that up into this bubble, it makes it really incredibly hard to kind of do the work that we do without having these very prescriptive standard operating procedures that then get built into a safety and security plan. We go out and train all of our staff on that so they know exactly what to do. From these minor incidents, things like fire, you have to wear your seatbelt, for example, that really matter, that are preventable. And 9 times out of 10, those are the incidents we get. So the more large scale, the more impactful. And then we also work to create contingency plans. So when we talk about what is the worst that can happen, we want to make sure that we can plan for that. And traditionally what you'll see is, you either see shelter in place, you'll see evacuation, or you'll see a relocation. I think it is important to note that the difference in our field is staggering whenever you talk to colleagues, that you may have at State Department, or colleagues that you may have at DoD. They have a much more robust resource kind of profile, I guess, to pull from. we are at a much more limited resource base. So you do almost everything outside of the wire. You kind of exist based on what your organization's ability is to provide for safety and security. So, I think it's just a common misconception that we think that, oh, if you're ever in trouble, or if you get detained or things like that, that someone's going to come to your rescue. That's not the case. So it's crucial and it's important to make sure that each individual in our organization knows that they're responsible for their own safety and security, and how we do that is to make sure that they've got access to training and access to resources that can keep them safe and their colleagues safe. So that's in short what I do on a day-to-day. We can go into anything that you might find interesting, or coming up next, I'm headed to Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq, and West Bank to do similar types of trainings. I want to focus this time a lot more on kind of women's safety issues, so I'm hoping to train on that as well. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, thank you, Jen. I wanted to give the students a chance now to maybe ask any questions that they have.
Go for it. And Mrs. Hardin, this is Mark Boone. I could probably sit here all day and talk to you about that region of the world you're operating in. But specifically on that Aleppo piece you were talking about early on, you're mentioning an area about 25 miles north of Aleppo. Were you working like in the Manjib pocket, and were you on the Turkey side of the business there? Or
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Were
you doing cross-border?
Yeah, Turkish side, a town called Kilis, Kilis, and so you probably know all this, Mark, but it was interesting for two reasons. One, we were allies. We worked with the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Turkey and kind of had like a green light situation where we were able to kind of start building up this program, or this potential for this program. So because of that time, it was still incredibly dangerous for anyone, any American, to cross over. So that's why we just went up to that border. So we operated out of Turkey. I would say on top of that, the other issue being is that, as you well know, Turkey is a very nationalistic country. They make no joke, secret about it. And so we had to be really, really careful about different community representatives and kind of who their affiliates were. They're not friendly towards the Kurds, obviously. So it was, you kind of had to watch where you were stepping all the time.
Yeah, and Mrs. Hardin, that actually really brought up the second part of what I wanted to ask you about, is that I'm pretty familiar with that area and the complexity of that. Not only is it one of the most dangerous places in the world to be working, but the complexity of all the different organizations that are operating in that area, some good, some bad, some sort of playing both sides of the fence. It's remarkable that you guys were doing this this training package in that area.
Well, I think we were fortunate because the folks that we worked with, in theory in general, before this, before the breakdown, like, it's one of the highest educated countries. You can find, PhDs and whatever you need to find, so versus operating in a place like West Africa, right? So we've struggled to find that same type of talent pool in Chad to kind of do some of the more complex work. So we were just lucky that, we had incredible people to work with, because they're the ones they're the ones that are shouldering all the burden of the frontline work.
Jen, maybe if you could talk a little bit about a lot of the students in this cohort and in all the previous cohorts the past few years have been concerned with the present socio-political climate about finding a job post-graduation.
Yeah,
If you could
I get that.
Gaining employment and what they can be doing now while they're in the program that would help them best, and just trying to prepare them and arm them with as much opportunities as possible that will help them gain a job later in the field.
Yeah, I'm nervous. I'm nervous too, to be honest, under this new administration. I think, it's kind of a wait and see game, but to give you an idea, typically there's a forecast that comes down every year on government, this would be USAID projects. that kind of say, they won't give you a lot of information, but they'll say like, here are RFPs or RFQs. So those are program proposals that are going out, requests for them. And they're like, these are kind of the areas we want to work in. This is our target, value amount for this particular program. And we haven't really seen a lot for 2017, which is problematic. And not only to keep up operations, but to expand to an ever-expanding humanitarian crisis, multiple places in the world. So I would say because of that, the 2 points that I brought up earlier are crucial, which is that network, meaning obviously, as alumni, we are also a part of your network, but also the people sitting at your table are incredibly valuable, not only for kind of job-related opportunities, but also for networking opportunities. So if there is a particular, I was talking to Jen McNeil before we all got on the call, but essentially, Jen was interested in this, and I said, well, hey, there's this, I sit on the steering committee for the Department of State that oversees Security Advisory Council. Next time you're in town, why don't you try to come to, we have a happy hour and then a meeting. I said, why don't you try to come, and so that you can meet and kind of network with all of the INGO security, people. So even if it's not necessarily an outright job opportunity, growing and expanding your network and offering yourself, putting yourself out there and saying, does anybody know of an organization or a committee that or association that may exist that maybe I'm not familiar with? Just put it out there, and I'm sure people probably know of something. I would also say that I don't want to try to tell the future, but I would say that the private institutions, things like, so the foundation, for example, that Christy had her fellowship through, I think those things are going to be relatively stable and safe. Private institutions, I think the outlook looks good for that. I would say that also alternatively, you're not always hamstrung by USAID funding on projects or organizations that derive a lot of their portfolio funding. I think that the British government has tons and tons of programs, as well as the Australian. So I think that there's opportunity for growth there too. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions?
I've got one more.
Okay, go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And Mrs. Hardin, would you mind shifting gears and talk a little bit about Pakistan?
Sure.
I've got just if I could just give you a primer question. So it's one of the things that really keeps me up at night, North Korea and Pakistan specifically. I'm amazed at the list of countries that you've rattled off that you've worked in, because those are difficult areas for a woman. So congrats on groundbreaking efforts there. But specifically with Pakistan, with a soaring unemployment rate in that country, weapons of mass destruction that are pretty elusive, and then all of the fracturing and the elements that you discussed when you mentioned it. My question is, with the ISI, are you seeing any kind of positive breakthrough? Are you able to work with the ISI? Is there a positive development there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. You know your stuff. So let's have an offline conversation too about the message I sent you on LinkedIn. There's 3 links that may be really informative for you. I hope they're helpful. So yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, obviously you saw on the Pakistani news website, one of their national websites, that they basically had a successful missile test, so a range of 2,100 kilometers, capable of carrying a warhead. So both India and Pakistan kind of have an interesting dynamic. That's something to think about. But also, I think to drill down, so I hope that answered that, and then to drill down into ISI, we have a delicate relationship in that, at any one given time, to give you just going to put this in context and perspective, Karachi is a mega city, obviously, so there's 22 million people there at any given time. There's about 1,200 Americans, and most of those are either consulate basically, or support consulate employees, so they're kind of sheltered behind that wall. For the rest of us, there's about 200. So they know what you're doing at any given time, make no joke about it. So I think one is just, constantly making sure that everything that you do is, respectful, it's by the book, and that it can't be construed in any other way. I know that we've run into issues in terms of from the humanitarian community being perceived as intelligence or something else. I mean, especially with the polio vaccination, trying to eradicate polio. But, it's the one country that still has polio issues. I mean, come on, this is fixable. But because the intelligence community decided to get involved and use that as a cover, it really hurt humanitarian work. So ISI is well aware of that. So traditionally, we get questioned basically anytime I'll travel there, then my security manager gets questioned about what was the nature of my business, where did we go, who did we talk to, where did we stay, what we ate. It's a joke, but yeah, so definitely delicate. However, I will say that the reason that we rely so heavily on our local staff is because they have expertise, but also because of their network. So our security manager has a very healthy relationship with the Governor ISI office, and we're able to get threat warnings traditionally well before we get them from the embassy or consulate.
Thank you.
Well, I wanted to also give Jennifer, because she's joining us remotely, and I don't know if Elizabeth West is online too. Jennifer, did you have any questions?
Hi, everyone. I actually was chatting with Jen prior to the session, so we were talking about, like, if I go to DC next in the chat that we will hopefully have. But I am just so impressed because I actually met Jen when she was in the DRLA program, and so it's been really cool to see her career trajectory. And Jen, I really appreciate you speaking with everybody right now because you are such an inspiration. I can speak for myself and say to me. And Mark touched on a couple of things that I would have asked about, like security for women, any advice you have as a woman working in this field, especially in the security sector and also abroad, and just the networking and everything. So my questions have kind of been covered, but thank you again so much for talking to us.
You bet. It was my pleasure. But I would say that, I don't know, if you're a female or identified female and you want to go into this field, it's a bit tricky. I mean, it's fine. It's just a humbling experience. So just be prepared that, a male will introduce you first, and then if that's okay, with everybody in the room, then you can do your piece, you can do your job. And because you're not, right, so to be clear, you're not there to change and to convince, how do I say that, to impose American, ideologies or concepts. You're there to deliberate.
That's a very good point, Jen. Well, thank you so much. And if there are no other questions, I wanted to ask, really the vision for this Masters of Disaster speaker series is not just for the students to hear from alumni, but to start thinking about a mentoring program. And I hope you will be available to anybody that might have some questions or need advice in the future. I hope that we'll be able to use it. It's so neat to see our DRLA alums really all over the world now, and having this network. And it's going to be amazing for our current cohorts as they go along to be able to make those connections. And I just really appreciate you kicking us off here with the inaugural Masters of Disaster Speaker Series. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Meredith. Yeah, just Mark, just hit me up offline and we'll continue our conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye.